I stood at the kitchen counter, chopping onions for my signature beef stew, when Josie burst through the front door. Her face was flushed, eyes wild with a mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite place. "Mom, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling. I set down the knife, wiping my hands on my apron. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Josie paced the kitchen, her hands clenched into fists. "I saw Dad today. He was with Claudia." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, with Claudia?" "They were at the mall, holding hands. I saw them, kissing." Josie's voice cracked on the last word. The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Are you sure it was them?" Josie nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm positive, Mom. I'm so sorry." I took a deep breath, trying to process this bombshell. Steve and Claudia, my husband and my best friend? It couldn't be true. But Josie wouldn't lie about something like this. "Did they see you?" I asked, my mind racing. "No, I don't think so. I ran out of there as fast as I could." I pulled Josie into a hug, feeling her body shake with sobs. "It's okay, sweetie. We'll figure this out." Just then, the front door opened again. Jesse walked in, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He took one look at us and froze. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I released Josie and turned to face my son. "Jesse, we need to talk. All of us." We gathered around the kitchen table, the beef stew forgotten. I explained what Josie had seen, watching Jesse's face darken with each word. "I'll kill him," Jesse growled, his hands balling into fists. "No, you won't," I said firmly. "We need to handle this like adults." "But Mom," Josie interjected, "what are you going to do?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. "First, I need to talk to your father. We need to hear his side of the story." "His side?" Jesse scoffed. "What side could possibly justify cheating on you?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I owe it to our family to at least hear him out before making any decisions." The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made us all freeze. Steve was home. "Kids, go to your rooms," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to talk to your father alone." Josie and Jesse exchanged worried glances, but did as I asked. As they climbed the stairs, I heard the front door open. "Laura?" Steve called out. "Something smells good." I stood up, smoothing down my apron. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists at my sides. Steve walked into the kitchen, a smile on his face that quickly faded when he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" I looked at him, this man I'd loved for over 20 years, and felt my heart breaking. "We need to talk, Steve. Josie saw you today, with Claudia." The color drained from his face. "Laura, I can explain." "Can you?" I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can you explain why our daughter had to see her father kissing another woman? Can you explain why you'd betray me with my best friend?" Steve's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. In that moment of silence, I heard the muffled sobs of Josie from upstairs and Jesse's attempts to comfort her. I took a step closer to Steve, my voice low and dangerous. "You have one chance to tell me the truth, Steve. One chance to save this family. What's it going to be?" As I stared into his eyes, searching for any sign of the man I married, I realized that no matter what he said next, nothing would ever be the same again. Our perfect little family was shattered, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I couldn't sleep that night. Steve's weak explanations and half-hearted apologies echoed in my head. By morning, I was a mess of anger and hurt, determined to see the truth for myself. I drove to Claudia's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As I turned onto her street, my heart stopped. There was Steve's car, parked right in front of her house. I pulled over, my vision blurring with tears. How could he do this? How could they both betray me like this? My phone buzzed. It was Jesse. "Mom, where are you? Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "I'm fine, honey. I just needed to run an errand." "You don't sound fine. I'm coming to get you." "No, Jesse, But he had already hung up. I sat there, staring at Claudia's house, willing myself not to march up to the door and confront them both. 20 minutes later, Jesse's beat-up Corolla pulled up behind me. He got out and tapped on my window. I rolled it down, avoiding his eyes. "How did you find me?" "Find my iPhone," he said, his voice tight. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I gestured weakly at Steve's car. Jesse's face darkened as he understood. "Let's go home," he said, opening my door. "You shouldn't be here." As I got out, the front door of Claudia's house opened. Steve stepped out, laughing at something behind him. When he turned and saw us, the laughter died on his lips. "Laura? Jesse?" He looked between us, confusion and guilt warring on his face. Jesse stepped forward, his fists clenched. "How could you, Dad? How could you do this to Mom?" Steve held up his hands. "Son, it's complicated. You don't understand." "I understand plenty," Jesse spat. "I understand that you're a lying, cheating—" "Jesse, stop," I said, grabbing his arm. "This isn't helping." Claudia appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Laura, I'm so sorry. We never meant for this to happen." I laughed bitterly. "Never meant for what to happen, Claudia? For me to find out? For my children to see their father destroy our family?" Steve took a step toward us. "Laura, please, let's talk about this. Not here. Not like this." "No," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "We're done talking, Steve. We're done with all of it." I turned to Jesse. "Let's go home." As we drove away, Jesse glanced at me. "Mom, what are we going to do?" I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood blur past. "I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out together." When we got home, Josie was waiting on the porch. One look at our faces told her everything. "It's true, isn't it?" she asked, her voice small. "Dad's really leaving us for her." I pulled both my children into a tight hug, feeling their bodies shake with silent sobs. "I don't know what your father's going to do," I said. "But I know that the three of us are going to be okay. We have each other, and that's what matters." We went inside, and I made us all some tea. As we sat around the kitchen table, I looked at my children's tear-stained faces and felt a fierce protectiveness wash over me. "I want you both to listen to me," I said. "What your father did was wrong. It's going to hurt for a long time, but we are not going to let this break us. We are stronger than that." Jesse nodded, his jaw set. "What do you need us to do, Mom?" I reached out and squeezed his hand. "Just be yourselves. Focus on school, on your friends. I'll handle everything else." Josie wiped her eyes. "But what about you, Mom? Who's going to take care of you?" I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest despite everything. "We'll take care of each other. That's what family does." As we sat there sipping our tea and making plans for the future, I felt a strange mix of sadness and hope. Our lives had been turned upside down, but we were still standing. And no matter what Steve or Claudia or anyone else threw at us, we would face it together. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the front door slamming. Steve was home. I steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I found him in the kitchen, slumped at the table, his head in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "Laura," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands steady despite the turmoil inside. "Yes, we do." Steve took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, I know that doesn't begin to cover it, but I am. What I did, it was unforgivable." "You're right," I said, my voice cold. "It was." He flinched at my tone. "I want to make this right. Tell me what I need to do." I laughed bitterly. "Make it right? Steve, you can't just fix this with an apology and some flowers. You destroyed our family." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "but I want to try. For the kids, if nothing else." I set my coffee cup down hard, liquid sloshing over the rim. "Don't you dare use our children as an excuse. You should have thought about them before you started sleeping with my best friend." Steve's face crumpled. "Laura, please. I made a mistake, a terrible, awful mistake. But I love you. I love our family. If you loved us, you wouldn't have done this," I spat. He stood up, reaching for me. I stepped back out of his reach. "Don't touch me," I hissed. Steve's hand fell to his side. He looked defeated, lost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "What do you want, Steve?" I asked, suddenly tired. "Why are you really here?" He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. "I want a divorce." The words hit me like a physical blow. Even after everything, I hadn't expected this. "A divorce?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. Steve nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I think it's for the best, for all of us." I felt the room spinning. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "You want to leave me for her, for Claudia." "It's not like that," Steve protested weakly. "Then what is it like?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Explain it to me, Steve. Explain how you can throw away 20 years of marriage, 2 children, everything we've built together for what? A fling with a woman who wears too much perfume and maxes out her credit cards?" Steve's face hardened. "Don't talk about her like that. You don't know her." "And you do?" I laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. Let me guess, she understands you in a way I never could. She makes you feel young again. Is that it? Stop it, Laura, Steve said, his voice low and dangerous. No, you stop it, I shot back. You don't get to waltz in here and demand a divorce like you're asking for a cup of sugar. You don't get to destroy our lives and then act like you're the victim. Just then, Josie appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Mom, Dad, what's going on? Steve's expression softened. Josie, honey, go back to your room. Your mom and I are just talking. No, I said firmly. She deserves to know. Your father wants a divorce, Josie. He's leaving us for Claudia. Josie's eyes filled with tears. Dad, is that true? Steve looked stricken. Josie, it's complicated. I never meant to hurt anyone. But you did, Josie said, her voice breaking. You hurt all of us. She turned and ran upstairs. We heard her door slam shut. Steve moved to follow her, but I blocked his path. Leave her alone. You've done enough damage. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Laura, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling, take some time apart, anything but this. I shook my head, feeling a strange calm settle over me. No, Steve, you wanted a divorce. You've got one. Now get out of my house. As I watched him leave, I felt a mix of grief and determination wash over me. Our life together was over, but I had 2 children who needed me. No matter what it took, I would protect them and give them the stability they deserved. Steve may have given up on our family, but I never would. I stood on Steve's parents' doorstep, my heart pounding. I'd always gotten along well with Martha and George, but this visit felt different, dangerous even. Still, I needed to try. For the kids' sake, if nothing else. Martha answered the door, her smile fading as she saw me. Laura, what are you doing here? I took a deep breath. We need to talk, Martha, about Steve. Oh, she hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. George was in the living room, watching golf. He muted the TV as I entered. What's this about, Laura? He asked, his voice gruff. I sat down, clasping my hands tightly in my lap. Steve and I are getting a divorce. He's been having an affair with Claudia. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha's face paled, while George's reddened. That can't be right, Martha said finally. There must be some mistake. I shook my head. I'm afraid not. Josie saw them together, and Steve admitted it to me himself. George leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. And what did you do to drive him to this, Laura? I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. Excuse me, George, Martha exclaimed, but he waved her off. No, I want to know, he pressed. Steve's a good man. He wouldn't do this without reason. I felt anger bubbling up inside me. Without reason. There is no reason good enough to justify what he's done. Martha sat down beside me, her face a mask of concern. Laura, dear, maybe if you'd been more attentive to Steve's needs. My needs? I interrupted, incredulous. What about my needs? What about our children's needs? George scoffed. Don't bring the kids into this. They'll be fine. Kids are resilient. I stood up, my hands shaking. Resilient? Do you have any idea what this is doing to them? Josie cries herself to sleep every night. Jessie's barely speaking to anyone. Well, maybe if you hadn't turned them against their father, Martha began. I didn't turn anyone against Steve, I snapped. He did that all on his own when he decided to throw away our family for a fling with Claudia. George stood up, towering over me. Now listen here, young lady. I won't have you coming into our home and speaking ill of our son. I refused to back down. Your son destroyed our family. He's abandoning his children for a woman who cares more about her designer handbags than anyone else. Martha gasped. How dare you speak about Claudia that way? She's a lovely woman. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. You knew, I whispered, looking between them. You knew about the affair, didn't you? Their silence was all the confirmation I needed. How long? I demanded. How long have you known? George looked away. That's not important. It is to me, I shouted. How long have you been lying to my face, pretending everything was fine? Martha stood up, wringing her hands. Laura, please try to understand. Steve was unhappy. Claudia makes him happy. I felt like I was going to be sick. And what about me? What about my happiness? What about our children's happiness? Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good, George said solemnly. I stared at them, these people I'd considered family for over 2 decades. The greater good? Is that what you call destroying a family? Martha reached out to touch my arm. I jerked away. Don't, I said, my voice cold. Don't you dare try to comfort me now. You're as much to blame for this as Steve is. I headed for the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I came here hoping for support, for some semblance of family. I see now that was a mistake. You're not my family. You never were. As I walked out, I heard Martha call after me, but I didn't turn back. My mind was racing, piecing together all the times Steve had visited his parents alone, all the knowing looks and hushed conversations. I got into my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I'd come here looking for peace, for a way to salvage something from this mess. Instead, I'd found more betrayal, more pain. As I drove home, I made a decision. No more olive branches, no more attempts at reconciliation. From now on, I was fighting for myself and my children, and God help anyone who stood in my way. I was elbow-deep in soapy water, scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary, when the front door slammed open. Steve stormed into the kitchen, his face a thundercloud of rage. "You went to my parents," he shouted, not bothering with a greeting. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands, trying to stay calm. "Yes, I did." "How dare you?" Steve's voice rose. "You had no right to drag them into this." I felt my own anger rising to match his. "No right? They're my children's grandparents. I thought they deserved to know what was happening to their family." Steve laughed bitterly. "Family? Is that what you call this? You've turned everyone against me." "I didn't turn anyone against you, Steve," I said, my voice steady. "You did that all on your own when you decided to cheat on me with my best friend." He slammed his fist on the counter, making me flinch. "Don't you dare bring Claudia into this." "Why not?" I shot back. "She's as much a part of this mess as you are." Steve's face contorted with anger. "This is exactly why I want a divorce. You're always playing the victim, never taking any responsibility for your part in this." I felt like I'd been slapped. My part? What part did I play in your decision to betray our marriage vows? "You were never there for me," Steve shouted. "Always too busy with the kids, with your hobbies, with everything but me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I was raising our children, Steve. Someone had to be there for them while you were working late nights and weekends." "Don't act like you're the only one who sacrificed," he spat. "I gave up my dreams to provide for this family." "And that gives you the right to throw it all away?" I asked, incredulous. Before Steve could respond, we heard a gasp from the doorway. Josie stood there, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. "Josie," Steve said, his voice softening. "Honey, I'm sorry. We didn't mean for you to hear that." Josie shook her head, backing away. "How could you say those things, Dad? How could you blame Mom for what you did?" Steve reached out to her, but she turned and ran upstairs. We heard her door slam shut. The fight seemed to drain out of Steve. He slumped against the counter, suddenly looking old and tired. "This is why I didn't want to involve the kids," he said quietly. I felt a surge of protective anger. "They're already involved, Steve. They're living this nightmare right along with us." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Can't we try to make this work? For their sake?" For a moment, I almost wavered. Then I remembered the look on Josie's face, the pain in Jesse's eyes when he found out about the affair. "No," I said firmly. "We can't. It's too late for that." Steve's face hardened. "Fine. If that's how you want it, we'll do this the hard way. I'm calling my lawyer in the morning." As he turned to leave, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "Steve," I called after him. He paused at the door, not turning around. "I want you out of the house by the end of the week," I said. "The kids and we need space to heal." Steve's shoulders slumped, but he nodded. Without another word, he left. I sank into a chair at the kitchen table, my mind racing. This was it. There was no going back now. We were really getting a divorce. I heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Jesse and Josie standing in the doorway, holding hands. Their faces were a mix of fear and determination. "Mom?" Jesse said softly. "What happens now?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. "Now, we fight, for our family, for our future. It won't be easy, but we'll do it together." As I looked at my children's faces, I knew I had made the right decision. No matter what Steve or his parents or anyone else threw at us, we would face it as a team. And somehow, someway, we would come out stronger on the other side. The law office felt cold and impersonal as I sat across from my attorney, Sarah. She shuffled through a stack of papers, her face grim. "Laura, I won't sugarcoat this," she said. "Steve's playing hardball. He's going for full custody of the kids and wants to sell the house." My stomach dropped. "He can't do that, can he?" Sarah sighed. He's claiming you're an unfit mother, citing your emotional instability since the separation. I felt the room spin. Emotional instability? I'm not the one who threw away our marriage for an affair. I know, Laura, Sarah said, her voice softening, but we need to be prepared. This is going to be a tough fight. As I left the office, my phone buzzed. It was my new boss at the bakery. Laura, I need you to come in. We're short-staffed. I glanced at my watch. Josie's parent-teacher conference was in an hour. I can't. I have a commitment with my daughter. Look, he said, his voice sharp. I know you're going through a rough time, but I need reliable employees. If you can't make it, don't bother coming back. I felt tears pricking my eyes. I'll be there, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I called Josie, my heart heavy. Honey, I'm so sorry. I can't make the conference. Work emergency. The silence on the other end was deafening. It's fine, Josie finally said, her voice flat. Dad said he'd go anyway. My blood ran cold. Your father's going? Yeah, Josie said. He called this morning, said he wanted to be more involved. I ended the call, my mind racing. Steve hadn't been to a school event in years. Why now? With a sinking feeling, I realized this was part of his strategy. Painting himself as the involved parent while I was too busy working to show up. The bakery was chaos when I arrived. I threw myself into the work, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of kneading dough and decorating cakes. But my mind kept wandering to Josie, to Steve sitting in that conference, charming her teachers. As I was closing up, my phone rang again. It was Jesse. Mom, he said, his voice tight with anger. Dad's here. He's packing up his stuff. And he's taking some of our things, too. I felt a surge of panic. What? Jesse, don't let him take anything of yours or Josie's. I'm trying, Mom, Jesse said, his voice cracking. But he says as long as he's paying child support, he has a right to it. He took your recipe book, the one with Grandma's beef stew recipe. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. That book was my most prized possession, filled with generations of family recipes. I'll be right there, I said, already running for my car. I broke every speed limit on the way home, my heart pounding. When I pulled into the driveway, Steve was loading boxes into his car. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted, slamming my car door. Steve turned, his face a mask of cold determination. Taking what's rightfully mine, Laura. You can't keep everything. I marched up to him, fury coursing through my veins. Give me back my recipe book, now. He smirked, holding it just out of reach. Oh, this old thing? I thought I'd give it to Claudia. She's always wanted to learn how to cook. Something inside me snapped. I lunged for the book, but Steve was quicker. He tossed it into his car and slammed the door shut. You can't do this, I said, my voice breaking. That's my family history, Steve. It's all I have left of my grandmother. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I used to love in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference. You should have thought of that before you turned the kids against me, he said, getting into his car. As he drove away, I sank to my knees on the driveway, feeling utterly defeated. How had it come to this? How had the man I'd loved for 20 years become this stranger who seemed bent on destroying me? I felt a hand on my shoulder and looked up to see Jesse and Josie standing there, their faces a mix of anger and concern. Mom, Jesse said softly, what are we going to do? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stand. We're going to fight, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Whatever it takes, we're going to fight. As we walked back into the house, I knew we were facing our toughest battle yet. But looking at my children, I also knew I had no choice but to win. For their sake and for mine. The phone rang, piercing the quiet of the kitchen. I glanced at the caller ID and froze. Steve. Hello, I answered, my voice wary. Laura, we need to talk, Steve said, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. Can we meet? My heart raced. After weeks of bitter legal battles and emotional turmoil, what could he possibly want? I don't think that's a good idea, Steve, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Please, Laura, it's important for the kids' sake. I closed my eyes, weighing my options. Finally, I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, the park where we used to take the kids when they were little. As I drove there, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, hurt, and a tiny, traitorous spark of hope that I couldn't quite extinguish. Steve was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. As I approached, he stood up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. Laura, he said, his voice cracking. Thank you for coming. I sat down, maintaining a safe distance between us. What do you want, Steve? He took a deep breath. I've made a terrible mistake. I want to come home. I want us to be a family again. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? Claudia and I, it's over, he continued. It was never real. You and the kids, you're my real family. I was a fool to throw that away. I stared at him, speechless. Part of me wanted to laugh hysterically, while another part wanted to scream. Steve, I finally managed, you can't be serious. After everything you've done, everything you've put us through, you think you can just come back? He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I know I've hurt you, Laura. I know I've hurt the kids, but I want to make it right. I'll do anything. Therapy, whatever it takes. I stood up, needing to put physical distance between us. And what about the custody battle? The house? My recipe book? Steve had the grace to look ashamed. I'll drop everything, the lawyers, the custody fight, all of it. I just want my family back. For a moment, I let myself imagine it, going back to our old life, pretending none of this had happened. But then I remembered the pain in Josie's eyes, the anger in Jesse's voice, the nights I'd spent crying myself to sleep. No, I said, my voice firm. No, Steve, we can't go back. You destroyed that the moment you chose Claudia over us. His face crumpled. Laura, please, I love you. I love our children. If you loved us, I said, feeling a strange calm wash over me, you wouldn't have betrayed us in the first place. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jesse. Mom, where are you? The bakery called. They need you ASAP or you'll lose your job. Reality came crashing back. I had responsibilities, a life I'd built without Steve. I couldn't throw that away on a whim. I have to go, I said, turning away. Steve grabbed my arm. Laura, wait, don't do this. Don't throw away 20 years of marriage. I yanked my arm free, fury rising in me. I didn't throw it away, Steve. You did, and now you have to live with the consequences. As I walked away, Steve called after me, his voice desperate. What about the kids? Don't they deserve a chance to have their family back? I stopped, turning to face him one last time. Our kids deserve parents who respect themselves and each other. They deserve stability and love, not broken promises and shattered trust. With that, I got in my car and drove away, leaving Steve standing alone in the park where we'd once been happy. As I raced to the bakery, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Had I made the right choice? Was I denying my children a chance at having their father back? But then I remembered the strength I'd found in myself, the resilience I'd seen in Jesse and Josie. We'd been through hell, but we'd survived. We'd built a new life, a stronger family unit. I pulled into the bakery parking lot, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. We would face them together, without Steve. Our family might be smaller now, but it was unbreakable. As I walked into the bakery, ready to fight for my job and our future, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in months, I knew without a doubt that I had made the right decision. The day of Jesse's college graduation dawned bright and clear. As I stood in the kitchen preparing a special breakfast, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we'd come. The doorbell rang and my heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was. I'll get it, Jesse called from the living room. I heard muffled voices, then Jesse appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face a mix of emotions. Mom, Dad's here. He wants to talk to all of us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Okay, let's hear what he has to say. We gathered in the living room, Josie perched on the arm of my chair, Jesse standing protectively nearby. Steve sat across from us, looking uncomfortable in his suit. I know I have no right to be here, Steve began, his voice shaky, but I couldn't miss Jesse's graduation, and I wanted to apologize to all of you. I felt Josie stiffen beside me while Jesse's face remained impassive. Steve continued, I've been selfish and stupid. I threw away the best thing in my life for nothing. Claudia left me. My parents barely speak to me. I've lost everything. That's not our problem, Dad, Jesse said, his voice cold. You made your choices. Steve nodded, his eyes filling with tears. I know, and I'll regret those choices for the rest of my life. But I was hoping maybe we could start over? Be a family again? I felt a surge of anger, remembering all the pain we'd endured. But before I could speak, Josie stood up. A family, she said, her voice trembling. We are a family, Dad. Mom, Jessie, and me. We've been there for each other through everything. Where were you? Steve looked stricken. Josie, No, she interrupted. You don't get to walk back in here and pretend nothing happened. Do you have any idea what Mom's been through? How hard she's worked to keep us together? I reached for Josie's hand, squeezing it gently. It's okay, sweetie. But Jessie stepped forward, his face set. No, Mom. Josie's right. Dad needs to hear this. He turned to Steve, his voice steady. Mom's been working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She's been to every school event, every doctor's appointment, everything. She even learned to make Grandma's beef stew from memory when you took her recipe book. I felt tears prick my eyes at the memory of that small victory. Steve looked at me, his face a mask of shame. Laura, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, but then I remembered all we'd been through, all we'd overcome. I appreciate your apology, Steve, I said, my voice calm, but we can't go back. We've moved forward and we're stronger for it. Steve nodded, defeat etched in every line of his face. I understand. I hope someday you can forgive me. As he stood to leave, Jessie spoke up. Dad, I still want you at my graduation, but not as my father. As a guest who's watching from afar, seeing what he lost. Steve's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. Thank you, Jessie. That's more than I deserve. After he left, we sat in silence for a moment. Then Josie turned to me, her eyes shining. Mom, I'm so proud of you. Of us. Jessie nodded, pulling us both into a hug. We made it, didn't we? I held my children close, feeling a wave of love and pride wash over me. Yes, we did, and we'll keep making it, every single day. Later, as we sat in the auditorium watching Jessie receive his diploma, I caught sight of Steve sitting several rows back. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw regret and longing in his gaze, but I felt no answering pull in my heart. Instead, I turned back to Josie, squeezing her hand as we cheered for Jessie. This was our family now, smaller perhaps, but stronger and more resilient than ever. As Jessie joined us after the ceremony, his face beaming with pride, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. We had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side. So, Jessie said, grinning at us, who's ready for some celebratory beef stew? Josie and I laughed, linking arms with him as we headed out into the bright sunshine. Our future stretched before us, full of promise and hope, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that we were going to be just fine. The envelope trembled in my hands, its crisp white edges mocking me with their perfection. I stared at the return address, willing the name to change. It didn't. Josh Turner. My ex-fiancé? You gonna open that, or just glare it to death? Harris, my colleague, leaned against my office doorway, his salt and pepper hair catching the fluorescent light. I tossed the envelope onto my desk. It's probably just junk mail. Harris raised an eyebrow. Junk mail doesn't make you look like you've seen a ghost, Naomi. With a sigh, I tore open the envelope. A gilded card slipped out, adorned with flowing script. My stomach dropped as I read the words. Well, it's a wedding invitation, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Josh is getting married. Harris whistled low. That's rough. You okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice. As Harris retreated, giving me space, I forced myself to read the rest of the invitation. That's when I saw it. The bride's name, Laurel Burke. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, dialing Josh's number before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the third ring. Naomi? His voice was cautious, tinged with surprise. Why would your sister not attend her own sister's wedding? I demanded, skipping pleasantries. There was a pause. What are you talking about? The invitation, Josh. Your fiancée. Laurel Burke. Why does she have my last name? Oh. Another pause. She said you two were estranged sisters. That's why she didn't want to invite you, but I insisted. I gripped the phone tighter. We're not family. There's no past that binds us as sisters. Look, Naomi, I don't know what kind of family drama you've got going on, but... There is no drama, Josh. I cut him off. I've never had a sister. Laurel is lying to you. Silence stretched between us. Then, I think you should talk to Laurel about this. Fine, I snapped. What's her number? Josh hesitated before rattling off a string of digits. I jotted them down, my handwriting barely legible. Naomi, Josh said softly. I'm sorry if this is bringing up stuff. I just thought you should know. I ended the call without responding, my fingers already dialing Laurel's number. It went straight to voicemail. Laurel, this is Naomi Burke. We need to talk about why you're telling people we're sisters. Call me back. I slammed the phone down, my mind reeling. Who was this woman, and why was she claiming to be my sister? More importantly, why was she marrying Josh? A knock at my door startled me. Harris was back, concern etched on his face. You look like you could use a drink. I nodded, grabbing my purse. As we walked to the elevator, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, Laurel. Stay out of my life, Naomi. You've already ruined enough. I showed Harris the message, my hands shaking. I've never even met her. How could I have ruined anything? Harris's jaw tightened. Sounds like someone's playing games. Dangerous ones. As we stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Josh. Laurel's upset. Says you're trying to sabotage our wedding. What's going on? I stared at the message, my mind racing. What had I stumbled into? And how was I going to untangle this web of lies? The elevator doors opened, and Harris gently guided me out. Come on, he said. Let's figure this out over that drink. As we walked into the crisp evening air, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something told me that Laurel Burke was about to turn my life upside down, and I had no idea how to stop her. The cafe bustled with the lunch crowd, but I barely noticed as I sat across from Josh, my hands wrapped tightly around a mug of lukewarm coffee. His familiar face, once a source of comfort, now filled me with a mixture of anger and confusion. Naomi, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this, Josh said, his tone dismissive. So what if Laurel says you're sisters? Why does it matter? I leaned forward, my voice low and intense. It matters because it's a lie, Josh. We're not family. There's no past that binds us as sisters. Josh's eyes narrowed. Are you sure about that? Maybe there's something you don't know. I think I'd know if I had a sister, I snapped. What I want to know is why Laurel is lying to you, and why you're so willing to believe her over me. He shrugged, a gesture that used to drive me crazy during our relationship. Laurel's been nothing but honest with me. Maybe you're the one who's confused. I felt my temper rising. Confused? Josh, I'm telling you the truth. Laurel and I are not related. Why can't you see that she's manipulating you? The way I see it, Josh said, leaning back in his chair, you're just jealous. You can't stand the fact that I've moved on and found someone better. His words hit me like a slap. Better? You think a liar is better? At least she's not constantly nagging me about my career, Josh retorted. Unlike you, Laurel supports my music. I laughed bitterly. Your music? Josh, when was the last time you even picked up a guitar? You gave up on your dreams years ago. His face flushed with anger. You don't know anything about my life anymore, Naomi. Laurel believes in me. She's helping me get back into the scene. And let me guess, she's funding your comeback too? I asked, suddenly seeing the situation with painful clarity. Josh's silence was all the confirmation I needed. God, Josh, I said, shaking my head. Can't you see what's happening? She's using you, just like she's using my name. You're wrong, he insisted, but I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Laurel loves me. She wouldn't lie to me. Then explain why she's pretending to be my sister, I challenged. Ask her about her family, her childhood. I bet she can't give you a straight answer. Josh's phone buzzed and he glanced at it. His face paled slightly. I have to go, he said abruptly, standing up. Laurel's waiting for me. As he turned to leave, I called out, Josh, wait. Just be careful, okay? Something's not right here. He paused, looking back at me with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. I'll talk to Laurel, he said finally. But I think you're the one who needs to be careful, Naomi. Don't make accusations you can't back up. I watched him walk away, my mind reeling. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone chimed with a text. It was from Laurel. Stay away from Josh. You had your chance. He's mine now, and I won't let you ruin this for me. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly dialed Harris's number, needing to hear a friendly voice. Harris, it's Naomi. Can you meet me? I think I'm in trouble. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just opened Pandora's box. Laurel's threat echoed in my mind, and I realized with growing dread that this was far from over. Whatever game Laurel was playing, it was clear she saw me as a threat, and I had a sinking feeling that she wouldn't stop until one of us was destroyed. I paced the length of Harris's office, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Harris watched me from behind his desk, concern etched on his face. Naomi, you need to slow down and tell me exactly what happened, he said, his voice steady and calming. I took a deep breath and sank into the chair across from him. It's Laurel. She's threatening me, Harris. And Josh, he's completely under her spell. Harris leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Start from the beginning. I recounted my confrontation with Josh, Laurel's text, and the growing sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. As I spoke, Harris's expression darkened. Laurel's always brought chaos wherever she goes, he muttered. I blinked in surprise. You know her? Harris nodded grimly. We crossed paths a few years ago. She was working as a temp in our legal department. Left quite an impression, and not a good one. What happened? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Let's just say she has a talent for manipulating people and situations to her advantage, Harris replied. She nearly cost us a major client with her schemes. I felt a chill run down my spine. And now she's set her sights on me. But why? What could she possibly gain by pretending to be my sister? Harris's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of concern and determination. I don't know, but we're going to find out. Naomi, I think it's time you cut ties with Josh and this whole situation. It's not safe. I shook my head. I can't, Harris. If I walk away now, who knows what Laurel might do? She could ruin my reputation, my career. We won't let that happen, Harris assured me, reaching across the desk to squeeze my hand. The gesture sent a flutter through my chest, catching me off guard. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I know your secret, Naomi. Meet me at Riverside Park at 7 p.m. if you don't want Josh to find out. My hand shook as I showed Harris the message. What secret? I whispered, panic rising in my throat. I don't have any secrets. Harris's jaw clenched. It's a bluff. She's trying to scare you. Well, it's working, I admitted. What should I do? We'll go together, Harris said firmly. I'm not letting you face this alone. As evening fell, Harris and I made our way to Riverside Park. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grass, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves. We found a bench with a clear view of the surrounding area and sat down to wait. At precisely 7 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows. Laurel. She walked towards us, her face a mask of cool confidence. I said, "Come alone," she sneered, eyeing Harris. "Whatever you have to say to me, you can say in front of Harris," I replied, grateful for his solid presence beside me. Laurel's eyes narrowed. "Fine. Have it your way." She turned to me, her voice dripping with venom. "I know about the money, Naomi, the funds you embezzled from your last job to pay for your mother's rehab." I felt the blood drain from my face. How could she possibly know about that? I'd gone to great lengths to keep it hidden, even from Josh. Harris's hand found mine, squeezing it reassuringly. "That's a serious accusation, Laurel. I hope you have proof to back it up." Laurel smirked. "Oh, I do. And unless Naomi wants it splashed all over the internet, she'll do exactly as I say." I stood up, my legs shaking, but my voice steady. "What do you want from me, Laurel?" Her eyes glittered with malice. "I want you to disappear. Leave town, quit your job, and never contact Josh again. If you do, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." As Laurel's ultimatum hung in the air, I realized with growing horror that my past had finally caught up with me, and now it threatened to destroy everything I'd worked so hard to build. The church bells chimed as Harris and I approached the ornate doors. My stomach churned with a mixture of dread and determination. I smoothed my navy blue dress, a stark contrast to the sea of pastels surrounding us. "You don't have to do this," Harris murmured, his hand a comforting presence on my lower back. I took a deep breath. "Yes, I do. I need answers." We slipped into the back pew just as the wedding march began. Heads turned, curious whispers rippling through the crowd at our late arrival. I ignored them, my eyes fixed on Josh at the altar. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his cufflinks. Then Laurel appeared, a vision in white. Her eyes locked with mine for a brief moment, a flash of triumph in her gaze. I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay calm. The ceremony was a blur of words and rituals. I barely registered the vows, too focused on the way Josh's hands trembled as he slipped the ring onto Laurel's finger. Did he have doubts? Or was I projecting my own unresolved feelings? As the newlyweds made their way down the aisle, Laurel's arm looped possessively through Josh's. I felt a sudden wave of clarity. This wasn't about Josh anymore. It was about uncovering the truth behind Laurel's lies. At the reception, Harris and I kept to ourselves, observing from a corner table. Laurel flitted from guest to guest, her laughter tinkling like shattered glass. Harris muttered, "Watch how she works the room." I nodded, noticing how Laurel subtly guided conversations, always keeping herself at the center of attention. She's been planning this for a long time. Suddenly, Josh appeared at our table, his face flushed from champagne. "Naomi, I'm glad you came," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Can we talk? Alone?" I glanced at Harris, who gave me a reassuring nod. 5 minutes, I told Josh, following him to a quiet alcove. "Why are you really here?" Josh asked, his eyes searching mine. "I could ask you the same thing," I retorted. "Are you happy, Josh? Really happy?" He hesitated, and in that moment I saw a flicker of the man I once loved. I don't know, Laurel, she's intense. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning." "Then why marry her?" I pressed. Josh's expression hardened. "Because she believes in me. She supports my music, unlike you." I laughed bitterly. "Is that what she told you? Josh, I always supported your dreams. It was you who gave up." Before he could respond, Laurel's voice cut through the air. "There you are, darling." She sidled up to Josh, her eyes cold as she regarded me. "Naomi, I'm so glad you could make it. It means so much to have my long-lost sister here." I bristled at her words. "Cut the act, Laurel. We both know we're not sisters." Laurel's smile never wavered. "Oh, Naomi, always so dramatic. Perhaps it's time I shared some family photos with our guests. I'm sure they'd love to see us growing up together." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "I have quite the collection. It's amazing what you can do with Photoshop these days." As she sauntered away, Josh in tow, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Laurel wasn't just lying, she was creating an entire false history. I rushed back to Harris, my mind reeling. "We need to leave. Now." "What happened?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "Laurel's gone too far," I said, my voice shaking. "She's fabricating evidence of our supposed sisterhood. If those photos get out, my reputation, my career, everything could be ruined." Harris stood, his jaw set. "Then we fight back. It's time to uncover who Laurel really is and why she's doing this." As we left the reception, I felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. Laurel had raised the stakes, but she'd also made a critical mistake. In her attempt to trap me, she'd given me the push I needed to dig deeper into her past. "Thanks for opening my eyes, Josh," I muttered as we drove away. "You've done me a favor." The battle lines were drawn. It was time to take control of my narrative and expose Laurel's web of lies, no matter the cost. The reception hall buzzed with chatter and clinking glasses, but all I could focus on was Laurel's venomous glare from across the room. Harris squeezed my hand reassuringly as we made our way to a quiet corner. "We need to leave," I whispered urgently. "Laurel's threatening to release doctored photos of us as sisters. If those get out, my whole life could unravel." Before Harris could respond, Laurel materialized beside us, her white gown rustling ominously. "Enjoying the party, dear sister," she sneered. I straightened my spine, meeting her gaze. "Drop the act, Laurel. We both know the truth." Her eyes narrowed. "Do we? Because I have a lifetime of memories that say otherwise. Memories I'm more than happy to share with everyone here." "You're bluffing," I challenged, but my voice wavered. Laurel's laugh was cold and brittle. "Am I? Let's find out." She turned to address the room, raising her voice. "Everyone, I have a special treat. Childhood photos of my sister Naomi and me." Panic surged through me as Laurel produced a tablet from seemingly nowhere. I lunged for it, but she danced away, tapping the screen with a triumphant smirk. The room fell silent as images flickered to life on the large projection screen. There we were, Laurel and I, smiling arm in arm at a beach, blowing out birthday candles together, posing in matching school uniforms. My heart raced as I recognized backgrounds from my own childhood photos, seamlessly altered to include Laurel. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt the weight of judgmental stares, the silent accusations of deceit. Even Harris looked confused, his brow furrowed as he glanced between me and the screen. "Isn't this lovely?" Laurel cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. So many precious memories. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in as the magnitude of Laurel's deception hit me. She hadn't just fabricated our relationship, she'd rewritten my entire history. "That's enough." Harris's voice cut through the chaos. He strode to the front of the room, unplugging the projector. This is a wedding, not a slideshow. Let's get back to celebrating the happy couple. As the guests reluctantly dispersed, Laurel cornered me, her eyes blazing. Why are you doing this? I hissed. What could you possibly gain? For a moment, her mask slipped, revealing a depth of pain and anger I hadn't expected. You have everything, she spat. The career, the respect, the man who loves you. I'm just taking what should have been mine. Before I could respond, Josh appeared, looking bewildered. Laurel, what's going on? Why is Naomi upset? Laurel's demeanor instantly changed, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, Josh. Naomi's trying to ruin our special day. She's always been jealous of our relationship. I watched in disbelief as Josh comforted her, shooting me an accusatory glance. The injustice of it all hit me like a physical blow. Why did I ever think Josh's approval mattered? I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. Harris was at my side in an instant, his presence a steadying force. Naomi, we need to go. This isn't healthy for you. As we turned to leave, Laurel's composure cracked entirely. She lunged at me, tears streaming down her face. You can't leave. You can't abandon me again. Security intervened, holding Laurel back as she sobbed hysterically. The raw anguish in her voice made me pause. There was something more here, a deeper pain driving her actions. In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't run from this. Whatever twisted game Laurel was playing, whatever wounds from her past were fueling this obsession, I needed to understand, for my own sake and maybe for hers too. I turned to Harris, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I can't walk away. Not yet. There's more to this story, and I need to uncover the truth. Harris nodded, his eyes filled with concern and something deeper. Admiration, perhaps? Then we'll face it together. Whatever comes next, you're not alone in this. As we left the chaos of the reception behind, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. Laurel's breakdown had revealed the depths of her instability, but also hinted at a shared pain I couldn't ignore. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The web of lies surrounding us was about to unravel, and I had to be ready for whatever truths lay beneath. The days following Laurel's wedding meltdown blurred together in a haze of anxiety and sleepless nights. I couldn't shake the image of her tear-stained face, the raw anguish in her voice, as she accused me of abandoning her. It didn't make sense, but I knew there was a missing piece to this puzzle. Harris had been my rock through it all, a steady presence as we dug deeper into Laurel's past. We'd discovered she'd changed her name several times, leaving a trail of broken relationships and financial disasters in her wake. But why was she so fixated on me? As I pored over another stack of documents in Harris's office, my phone buzzed. Josh's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Naomi, I need to see you. His voice was urgent, tinged with fear. It's about Laurel. Please, I don't know who else to turn to. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a nearby park. Harris insisted on coming with me, his protective instincts on high alert. Josh was already there when we arrived, pacing nervously. He looked haggard, nothing like the confident man I'd once loved. What's going on, Josh? I asked, keeping my distance. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Laurel's gone off the deep end. She's been ranting about you, about how you stole her life. I found plans in her notebook, detailed plans about ruining your career, your reputation. She's obsessed, Naomi. My blood ran cold. Why are you telling me this now? Because I finally realized how wrong I've been. Josh's voice cracked. About everything. About you. About Laurel. I've been such a fool. As he spoke, memories flooded back. The constant criticism, the subtle put-downs, the way he'd slowly chipped away at my self-esteem during our relationship. I felt a surge of anger, not just at Josh, but at myself for allowing it for so long. It's easier to promise the moon when you're cornered, isn't it, Josh? I said bitterly. He flinched at my words. I know I hurt you, Naomi. I was selfish and manipulative. But please, you have to believe me about Laurel. She's dangerous. Before I could respond, Harris stepped forward. We appreciate the warning, Josh, but I think it's time you step back and let Naomi move on with her life. Josh's eyes widened as he looked between us, realization dawning. You two are together? Harris finished, taking my hand. And I won't let anyone hurt Naomi again. Not Laurel, and not you. As we turned to leave, Josh called out desperately. I still love you, Naomi. I know I don't deserve it, but please, give me another chance. I froze, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Part of me, the part that still ached from our shared history, wanted to believe him. But as I looked at Harris, steady and supportive beside me, I knew what I had to do. "No, Josh," I said firmly. "What we had is over. I've moved on, and it's time you did too." We walked away, leaving Josh standing alone in the fading sunlight. As we reached the car, my phone chimed with a text. Unknown number. "I warned you to stay away, sister dear. Now you'll pay. Check your email." With shaking hands, I opened my inbox. There, sent to everyone in my contact list, including my boss and colleagues, were documents detailing the embezzlement from my previous job, the secret I'd buried so deeply, the mistake I'd made out of desperation to help my mother. "Oh God," I whispered, showing Harris the screen. "She's ruined everything." Harris pulled me close. "We'll fight this, Naomi. Together. I promise you, we'll find a way through." But as the weight of Laurel's revenge settled over me, I couldn't help but wonder if this was a battle I could win. My career, my reputation, my future, everything I'd worked so hard for was crumbling around me. And somewhere out there, Laurel was watching, reveling in the chaos she'd created. The final showdown was coming, and I knew that only one of us would be left standing when the dust settled. The world around me crumbled as I stared at my phone, Laurel's vengeful email burning into my retinas. My career, my reputation, everything I'd worked so hard for was in jeopardy. Harris's arm around my shoulders felt like the only thing keeping me from collapsing. "We need to get ahead of this," Harris said, his voice steady despite the storm raging around us. "Let's go to your office. We'll talk to HR, explain the situation." I nodded numbly, allowing him to guide me to the car. The drive to the office was a blur, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. As we stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed again. "Josh." "Naomi, please, I need to see you. It's urgent." I showed Harris the message, my hand trembling. "What should I do?" He frowned. "It could be a trap. Laurel might be using him to get to you. Or he might have information that could help," I countered, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "I need to know, Harris. I need to end this." Reluctantly, he agreed, and we arranged to meet Josh at a nearby coffee shop. When we arrived, Josh was already there, looking haggard and desperate. "Naomi, thank God," he said, standing as we approached. "Laurel's gone. She emptied our accounts and disappeared. I think she might be coming for you." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, coming for me?" Josh's eyes darted nervously around the cafe. "I found her journals. She's been planning this for years, Naomi. The wedding, the fake sisterhood, it was all part of some twisted revenge plot. She blames you for something that happened in her past, something about her real sister." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. "The temp job," I whispered. 5 years ago, I was on the hiring committee. We didn't choose her sister for a position. She was devastated." "And now she's out to destroy you," Harris finished, his jaw clenched. Josh nodded miserably. "I'm so sorry, Naomi. I should have seen through her lies. I was weak and I let her manipulate me. But I want to make it right. Please, let me help you stop her." For a moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I once loved. Vulnerable, sincere. But as I looked at Harris, steady and supportive beside me, I knew there was no going back. "I appreciate the warning, Josh," I said softly. "But this isn't your fight anymore. Please forget about me, forever. It's time we both moved on." The hurt in his eyes was palpable, but I stood firm. As Josh left, shoulders slumped in defeat, I turned to Harris. "We need to find Laurel before she does any more damage." Just then, my phone chimed with a new email. My breath caught as I read the subject line, "Your mother says hello, sister dear." With shaking hands, I opened the message. There was a photo of my estranged mother, Grace, bound and gagged in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. The message below chilled me to the bone. "Time to face your past, Naomi. Come alone to the address below, or Mommy Dearest pays the price for your sins." I showed Harris the screen, my mind reeling. "She has my mother. I have to go." Harris gripped my shoulders, his eyes intense. "Not alone. We'll call the police. No," I cut him off. "You don't know Laurel. She'll hurt my mother if I don't play by her rules. I have to do this myself." "Naomi, please," Harris pleaded. "Let me help you. We can face this together." I cupped his face in my hands, memorizing every line and curve. "I love you, Harris, but this is my battle to fight. I need to end this once and for all." Before he could protest further, I turned and ran, hailing a taxi and leaving Harris behind. As the city blurred past the windows, I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. Laurel had taken everything from me, my past, my present, and now she threatened my future. But I was done being a victim. It was time to reclaim my life, no matter the cost. The taxi pulled up to a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out, ready to face my tormentor and end this nightmare once and for all. The warehouse loomed before me, a hulking shadow against the twilight sky. My heart raced as I pushed open the rusted door, stepping into the gloom. "Laurel?" I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I'm here. Let my mother go." A chilling laugh rang out, and Laurel emerged from the shadows, her eyes wild with a manic gleam. Behind her I saw my mother, Grace, bound to a chair, fear etched across her face. "Welcome home, sister?" Laurel sneered. "Ready to pay for what you've done?" "Laurel, please," I pleaded, inching closer. "Whatever happened in the past, we can talk about it. Just let my mother go." She laughed bitterly. "Talk? Like you talked to my sister before crushing her dreams? Do you even remember her? Naomi? Sarah Jacobs, the girl you rejected for that job 5 years ago?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, a bright-eyed candidate, devastated by our decision. I'm sorry. We had no idea." "Sorry doesn't cut it," Laurel screamed, brandishing a gun. "Sarah killed herself because of you, and now you're going to feel that same pain." Time seemed to slow as Laurel turned the gun towards my mother. Without thinking, I lunged forward, tackling Laurel to the ground. We grappled fiercely, the gun between us. A deafening bang echoed through the warehouse. For a moment, everything was still. Then warmth spread across my side. I looked down to see crimson blooming on my shirt. "No!" Laurel's anguished cry pierced the air. She scrambled back, the gun clattering to the floor. I didn't mean." Suddenly, the warehouse doors burst open. Harris rushed in, followed by police officers. "Naomi!" he cried, racing to my side. As the officers subdued Laurel, Harris cradled me in his arms. "Stay with me, love," he whispered, pressing his hand to my wound. "Help is coming." Through the haze of pain, I saw my mother being untied, tears streaming down her face. "Naomi, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "For everything." I reached out, grasping her hand. "It's okay, Mom. We'll make it right." As paramedics swarmed around us, I locked eyes with Laurel one last time. The hatred in her gaze had melted away, replaced by a look of shocked remorse. In that moment, I saw not a monster, but a broken woman consumed by grief. "I forgive you," I whispered, not sure if she could hear me. But I needed to say it. For her, for Sarah, and for myself. The world faded to black as I was lifted onto a stretcher. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital room, Harris dozing in a chair beside me. Sunlight streamed through the window, a new day dawning. As Harris stirred, his eyes lighting up at seeing me awake, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. "I've finally seen the light," I murmured, squeezing his hand. "All thanks to you." He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead. "We made it through together," he said softly, "and we'll face whatever comes next the same way." In the days that followed, as I recovered and the legal proceedings against Laurel began, I found myself reflecting on the tangled web that had brought us all to this point. Josh, humbled by his mistakes, reached out to make amends before moving across the country for a fresh start. My mother and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship, years of misunderstandings finally being addressed. And Laurel, facing the consequences of her actions, started the long journey towards healing and redemption. I visited her once before the trial, offering forgiveness and encouraging her to seek help. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary, for both of us. As Harris and I stood on the balcony of our new apartment, watching the sun set on another day, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in years. The shadows of the past were finally receding, making way for a brighter future. "Ready for our new beginning?" Harris asked, wrapping his arms around me. I smiled, leaning into his embrace. "More than ready. It's time to write our own story, together." As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I had the strength to face them. The web of shadows had been untangled, and in its place, a tapestry of love, forgiveness, and second chances was being woven. At last, I was truly home.